Everybody, and welcome to the April episode of the South Dakota Forest Health Workshop brought to you by the South Dakota Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources. We're thrilled to have you here. I'm sitting in my office in Rapid City. It's about 60 degrees and sunny, albeit a little windy, but we had some good moisture this earlier this week. It really is starting to feel like spring, and I know our workloads are starting to ramp up. Field work is around the corner, so this is a very timely topic. What to expect this spring? Dr. Ball is going to go over the forecast for our region, what had transpired over the past few months, what we can expect here this growing season. So we're thrilled to have you with us. If you have any questions as the presentation is going on, please feel free to add them in the chat so they don't get forgotten. We'll have some time towards the end of the meeting to discuss as many questions as time allows. If you are a certified forester through the Society of American Foresters, please put your certified forester credentials in the chat box. Patricia will get those submitted for your SAF CEUs. If you are a certified arborist through the International Society of Arboriculture, please wait till the end of this workshop. Dr. Ball will present the CEU code that you will use for post approval through the ISA website. Of course, if you have any ISA questions or issues, feel free to reach out to me or Dr. Ball. I'd be happy to help you get those get that process underway. This workshop is being recorded. We like to take these recordings and put them on our YouTube channel so people can view them throughout the year. And moving forward, we have about 15 or 18 of our past workshops on the channel for you to view now. And this will be on there in the next week or so after we finish. I believe that's everything I'm supposed to get on my checklist. So with that, Dr. Ball, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Tony, and thank you everyone for joining us today. For many of you, it's your lunch hour, and that this will not run long, and they never do. And we will certainly have time for questions because it's a big topic, what's going to happen this spring, and we can't cover it all. But I'm going to try to hit a smattering because I know what the audience is. And I want to start out with my first prediction. It's going to be a bad year for windbreaks. And let me go through it. First of all, we're going to see mortality from what was planted last year. I'm going to cover that. And if we're not careful, we're going to see mortality from this year. And I want to go over some of the common problems I've seen in the last year for the new windbreaks because I go out there and take a look at them, sometimes at the request of the district, sometimes at the request of the producer. And I'm not saying these are always the fault of the conservation district, not by any means, but I'm being a little more specific here today on it. And here's the things. Seedlings not being picked up promptly. They are like fish. They're fresh for only so long. Improper storage. Usually at the district because the Big Sioux and the other nurseries generally have excellent storage facilities. Roots drying out during planting, J-rooting, and improper depth. And improper depth is more of a problem than people think about, but it's been in my pest alert several times in the last 2 years, so I'm going to go over that to a degree as well. But I know people are already picking up stock, as Tony said. Spring is here. It's 60-some degrees here in Brookings today. But a reminder for everyone picking up stock that's going to your districts and your storage there, remember, think of it as a refrigerator. 35 degrees would just be perfect if the stock could be held until sales are going out for being planted. And likewise, the longer you can leave them in the boxes that came, the better. Those boxes have a film to them. They help trap moisture. You also need humidity. 95 is really what we're looking at. So cold and humid, not dry and cold because the plants will desiccate at 35, but humid and cold. And too long isn't a problem, but you know what it's like if it gets to be the end of June. Yeah, that's been a long time things have been stored. So the ideal 34, 35, but do not let it freeze and thaw. That's the worst. And high humidity and plant by the end of early June if you could. And again, it depends on the season. But let me tell you this, and this is a key thing. You have to have roots in order to take up water. And I know it may sound like I'm stating the basics, But you need roots like that coming out of those new seedlings for them to take up moisture. And so when you plant it, they don't have those roots. What we have are roots that are woody and they haven't started to grow yet. Here's where we're at right now for soil temperatures, 4-inch depth, bare soils. You can see, particularly West River, we're hitting 45, 46. We're still at 37, 32 up on the Coteau, 38 in Aberdeen. We're just barely into the temperatures for planting. And when I say barely, I wouldn't yet. We need to wait for those soil temperatures to get a little warmer. They're just starting to reach it. Now, if you look when we hit it nicely, the last 2 years, about the first part of May, what you'll notice here is still you had a couple of low spots, but you got the 50s. 50 is perfect. 45 is acceptable. 50, we're now hitting the sweet spot because at 50 degrees, the soils are warm enough that those new bare root seedlings can establish a root system very quickly. And they have to establish a root system before the buds open in order to take up water. And so I know some people are kind of in a rush. Let's get things in. And I realize the season is short, but have a little patience. Don't jump it too long. We're just barely getting the minimum acceptable temperature. And we're probably 3 weeks away before we're really getting the temperatures that we really want to see. And that's 50 degrees. And once we hit that, and I put it, you'll see it up every week in my pest alert, what the soil temperatures are around the state. And that'll be a good guide as to when to get out there and plant. Um, but the other thing you need to look at here is the air temperatures. And what we're going to look at now is, well, how warm are the air temperatures? And we really want it to stay in the 60s and 70s. And the reason for we don't want it to get too hot. Last year, we actually started out with a pretty good temperature-wise for planting. There we were by June 15th, though. And notice now we're into the 80s. And that's a little at the high end to plant because the soils are warm, but they're giving off moisture so quickly through those buds at 80 to 85 degrees that the plants may fail. So the sweet spot for planting bare root seedlings is soil temperatures a little over 50 degrees. The soils are moist, the air temperatures in the 50s and 60s. And if we have that, that's a great time to do it. And I realize we're in South Dakota, so we've got to move that a little bit. And I know your window is pretty narrow to begin with, but this is really what I'd like to see. I did have a question this morning that I do want to address, and that was, well, we planted seedlings last year. Should we be watering them? Absolutely yes. But the roots are just beginning to grow out again on those seedlings you planted last year. So they don't need a lot of moisture. And if we're getting some precipitation, which it seems we are, that may be adequate. So don't overwater them right now, which I'm almost concerned about because we have a little moisture. But yes, they could use some moisture. But if it starts to puddle, you've added too much. But a little water right now, particularly if you missed any of the precipitation, either the snow or the rain, it's probably a good idea to get a little water out there, but a little, not a lot. And let me address planting depth, and we'll move on to some other issues too. But you don't want it too deep, you don't want it too shallow, you want it just right. Too deep is that first woody root is beneath the soil surface. Too shallow, it's above the soil surface. Correct, it's at the soil surface. Now, admittedly, then it's going to be just a little below that, just because soil does tend to move. But I see problems every year with plants being planted too deep or too shallow. Here's one last year that you can look at. Um, you'll notice on this one, I was literally pulling branches from underneath the soil. Right there, that white dashed line was the planting depth in this windbreak. And they were wondering why they were losing all their spruces. And this call was in the fall. And you can see they just slowly stagnated and died. But a lot of the trees in that belt had been planted too deep. If I'm pulling branches out of the soil, and admittedly, sometimes these branches are very close to the soil surface, that can be fine because the uppermost root should be just beneath it. But literally, I've seen it where they've planted them 2 inches too deep, and I'm pulling branches out, particularly on evergreens, and you're going to kill them. And too shallow. Look at this one. This one, the roots were above the soil surface. Most of the plantings are just right. The uppermost root is just beneath the soil surface. There's a little gap there, and you have the foliage for the evergreens, and you have a top for the ornamental trees, or excuse me, the broadleaf trees. But I do get out there in midsummer to look at some newly planted windbreaks, those that went in early in the season. And when I get out there, the problem is planting depth. It kills more than people realize. Oh, and then let's add the third one to it, and that's J roots. Look at this one. The plants were actually J rooted. You can see how the root went in, came up. When I went out and looked at these trees in a row, the base of the root was actually sticking above the soil surface, almost like a wick. So no J roots, no too shallow, no too deep. Get it, get it right. And I know the vast majority of people do, but it's always good as a reminder that it's an important step that sometimes people miss. And I realize turnover in planning crews often has to be retaught every year. Well, let's go on to the rest. I took that picture June 2023. The wall drug sign at the exit 132 on I-90 is my rain gauge. And that year, the rains were pretty good, though I have seen it where actually the base of the sign is underwater in that pond. The year before, it was a little drier. Last year, it was bone dry. You could walk across it. There was no water. That's how dry it's gotten. We had a little reprieve in 23, but this last year has been incredibly dry throughout the state. If you take a look, this is the current drought monitor for South Dakota and North Dakota this past week. So this is current. It does incorporate those rains and that we had a little bit earlier. But you'll notice here you have to get up into North Dakota and really the north and northeastern part of it before you're out of drought. And if you look at South Dakota, much of the state is under severe drought. The remainder of the state is under moderate drought. And then we do have the area down in the southwest that is under extreme drought. We've been there that long, and unless plants were irrigated last summer, I am expecting to see a lot of mortality over the winter. They're going to desiccate, and there's not going to be anything left of them. And here was our precept last year. Oddly enough, we got quite a bit, but it all came in April, May, and June, and then stopped. And that's what kicked us into the drought again, is we had rains, but they all came at one time, and then it went dry afterwards. And I'll do this probably almost my last windbreak planting slide, but I saw some unusual problems last year. This is one I went out and looked at in September, and the plants were dead, pretty much dead. I mean, browning and going. What had happened, it was so wet when they were planting, they could barely get them in. The ground was that wet. It was so wet that the trees weren't really producing roots because there wasn't enough oxygen. There was plenty of water, but not enough oxygen. And then, as many of you recall, what happened last summer, it rained and rained and rained, and then the faucet was shut off. And when it was shut off, boom, we had no rain. The plants had no roots. And that's why they started dying last fall. And I fully expect to see more dead this spring because of that odd combination of too wet and too dry. So water. This is what I liked to see last summer. Notice there's a bright green ring around the tree. Everywhere else around it is brown, particularly the southern half of the state where we've been in a drought for a while. And if people have not been watering their trees in their yards, particularly if they're maples or birch, which are very desiccation sensitive, if they went into fall dry, during the winter, those buds dried out. And we're going to see this again. We saw this before. We've seen this several years since 2000, where we have a very dry summer and fall. And if nobody waters, these plants literally die back. It can literally look like you drew a line right across the upper half of these. Maples, you're going to see it on birch where the tops are gone. We saw this last year, all right, because of the previous season. And unfortunately, it's going to be a twofer. We're going to see it almost back to back. Trees like this that they pruned at all the dead have probably died back once again. And watering the spring is not going to get it recovered. Dead tissue is dead tissue. So this is one of those things we reminded people water, water, water last fall. And if they did, we should not see the problem. If they haven't, we will. But we're also going to see losses in many of our other plants. You know, there's obviously a nice line of Colorado spruce, still properly spaced. They're not touching each other. They're not quite 20 years old yet, so they're still looking nice. But because of the drought, we're going to see more of this, where you're going out and finding dead and dying spruce. Now, last summer, particularly about September, the calls I would do on spruce dying uh, was almost continual. Spruce do not tolerate dry conditions. They don't. They're not adapted to that. They can tolerate a little bit, and our white spruce tolerates it better than blue spruce. But nevertheless, when it gets as dry as we've seen it, it's been pretty tough on them unless they're being irrigated. Arborvitae the same way. You can see the burn here on one side. You know, it's where the wind's coming from. And the fact that the plants went into the winter dry has turned this foliage into just crisp. And that's created a lot more problems that we're seeing in the ornamental landscape and in the windbreaks. All the calls I've gotten on honey locust gets a canker disease. And if the tree is stressed, the canker disease occurs around old pruning wounds. It's a nectaria canker. And that's what this row had down by winter. If you look, you'll notice kind of the discoloration, a little bit of a sunken area in the center. That's the canker. The canker often shows up near old pruning wounds or near branch unions. Okay. Near branch unions, that tissue is a little bit more sensitive. And so in windbreaks where you're not pruning, you'll often find this starting around one of the lower branches, but it's a weak pathogen. We don't control the pathogen. We manage the tree. And if the tree is stressed because of the lack of water, which we're certainly, and high temperatures, both of which we've seen this last summer, we're seeing more and more of this nectaria canker popping up, even on campus in areas where they really weren't watering that well. We saw this. And I've been getting a lot of pictures and gone out and looked at trees in ornamental landscapes where the tissue's dead around old pruning wounds. And they go, "What's this?" And I said, "That's canker." And there's not much you can do. You can prune out the dying branches, but in often cases, it's just remove the tree and start over. And we're going to see more insect problems too this year because of the drought last year, regardless of what happens this year. Last year set us up for problems, even if we get wonderful rains this year. This is a stand of windbreak of Scots pines. I was asked to go out and look. The question was, oh, I can see that they're declining. Is that pine wilt disease? Well, no. Pine wilt disease, the entire canopy, the foliage would be turning kind of bronze. In this case, you can see it's light here and there. And when I got close, look what I saw. This bubble gum, pitch masses. Now you find this on Scots pines, Austrian pines, and ponderosa pines. So our three major pines are all affected by this insect. And I can find it in Sioux Falls. I can find it in Rapid City. I can find it up in Spearfish a lot. I can find it in Aberdeen. I can find it in all the counties. So no matter where you live, it's been a problem. And it's a little bit more of a problem because all the trees are stressed. But this little insect here actually burrows in right near the branch unions. So you usually find this bubblegum pitch right around where the branch occurs. And if you can squeeze it still, it stays a little bit soft. And it weakens the branches and even the top to the point they snap off. Many times people don't notice the problem until they start seeing branches break off their trees. And then they look closely or they call me and I look at it and you can see here, you can see that kind of bubble gum just on the left side of that branch going upwards towards the center. And that's Zimmerman. The other indicator, Zimmerman, is you've got a tree that just goes like this, no straight stem anymore, because it's been repeatedly attacked by this insect. So there's its life cycle. Right now, it's a larvae. It's a little worm, and I mean very little worm. And right now, too, it's beginning to come out of its hibernaculum, which is this, has a little kind of silky cocoon, if you will. It's not a true cocoon, but it wraps itself in it and lives just beneath a bark flake. It's that tiny. So it's on the surface to it. And then it's going to burrow into the tree. And it's going to feed in the tree until sometime into July or so. And then we're going to have the adults, we're going to have it pupate, very short pupation time period. And then the adults come out, usually end of July, early August. They lay eggs at a branch union. Eggs hatch in the fall. Larvae continue to feed in the fall and then spend that little hibernaculum to overwinter. So you'll notice it has a very long time period as larvae, and it's doing feeding in the spring of the year and in the fall of the year, with the adults out in late summer. And in a couple of weeks, you can even pull the pitch away as it's forming, and you'll find that little caterpillar trying to push its way into the tree. It's got little legs on it, so it does look like a caterpillar, which it is. It'll be fairly tiny, not longer than the diameter of a penny to begin with in that, but you'll see these, and they have to burrow into the tree now. And they're going to burrow right around where the branch unions are, and it causes the branches to break. Now, the adults are at about 1,800 growing degree days. That's early August. That's when they're going to lay their eggs, and that's a time we often spray is August. Get the spray on, kill mom as she's laying eggs. But the larvae move out of that little hibernaculum underneath that bark flake right about now for at least the southern half of the state. Up by Aberdeen, they'll probably be a week or so away. And if you spray the bark now, that little caterpillar, as it crawls out and crawls along the bark to burrow into it, will be killed. And so that's why there's really two windows of spray now to kill the larvae, and then in August to kill mom, as well as any larvae that hatch from the eggs then. Permethrin is really the products that's used by that, the active ingredient. It comes in a number of formulations to it. So we're spraying now and then spraying again in August. But here's the key thing, people. When you're spraying for this, you have to spray the trunk of the tree. Excuse me. If you just wet the needles, they're not out at the needles. And so the sprayer's literally got to push it into the canopy on the trunk of the tree. And you make sure you want to thoroughly wet the area where the branch unions occur, where they meet the trunk, because that's where the larvae are going to be attracted to. And when I say spray, you want to spray enough that's all moistened. You don't want to spray so it's running off the base. You wasted chemical. but it's literally got to get on all that and in the cracks, the furrows of the bark as well to get really good control. And expect to see more borer problems. That's a Freeman maple. And this is the type of call I got in the fall of the year, and I will get it this fall probably. Horntails. Look at these. It looks like a wasp. It's not going to sting you. It knows the difference between you and a woody trunk. But in late summer, the adults are going along and laying eggs, and she literally is putting the egg in to the tree. Sadly enough for her, quite often when she puts her ovipositor in there and puts eggs in, she can't pull the ovipositor out. And so she's kind of stuck there and lives for a few days unless a bird gets her and then just dies. Otherwise, they will fly and lay more eggs in it. But a lot of times you'll just see one stuck out of the tree. But maples and a number of other tree species, this is the call I get in the late summer, fall. What are these insects? What do I spray? Well, you could treat for this, but the biggest reason is why are they attacking the tree? Well, they're attacking the tree because it's stressed. So once again, a key here is try to keep the trees healthy. And right now, the best treatment's water. Well, this includes emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer does go for our trees regardless of stress, but if they're stressed, they become even more attractive. So I'll spend a few minutes on this. I'm sure you're all aware of the insect. We don't need to spend a lot of time, but let's update where we know it's at. Remember, we know where it's at. We don't know where it isn't. And I say that because all we can do is confirm. And we always confirm it at least a couple of years after it's been there. And if you look at the current map, it is in Marshall, Minnesota, in Lyons County. It's over in Rock. It's certainly in Minnehaha, Lincoln County. Windbreaks everywhere hit. I can find it all the way down to Dakota Dunes. We're in that area. A little bit Turner. Brookings, we can find it in Brookings County, both in the city and the surrounding area as well. So we're recommending treatments even in the smaller communities in Brookings County. But, you know, if someone calls and says, well, I'm in Lincoln County, I think I have emerald ash borer in my trees. Well, if you don't, you will. It's that prevalent. And it's been there. We found it in 2018. It's probably, I think we traced it back to probably about 2014. So it's been there about 10 years. And some of the communities, it moves much slower. Worthing, it's been moving very slow in Worthing, but now you can see it. It's through with Canton. By the way, North Dakota, they haven't found it in Fargo yet, but guess what? They found it way out in the center of the state. Where? And that's a picture. At a rest stop. At a rest stop. And it's also in Winnipeg too, by the way. So there's what they caught at the rest stop. They were catching adults and then found it in trees. And so once again, moving firewood, moving logs out of quarantine counties is the best way to spread. I've not seen any overland transmission where I could follow a trail. Did it go up the Big Sioux all the way to Brookings? No, I can't find it along the Big Sioux. At least it's not very obvious. But where it suddenly popped up in town, yeah, okay, there it is. And so once again, getting people to observe quarantines, which they generally are, is critical in the success we're seeing and not having the spread very fast. But it is spreading, and it will inevitably spread across the state. That's the classic picture, by the way. I'm not going to go through all the symptoms. You're probably aware of them by now, but this one I took out by Canton. You get that bright green tuft of water sprouts near the base, a thinning canopy at the tips. That's almost always emerald ash borer. By the way, the one time I went up to a tree like this and it wasn't emerald ash borer, right at the base of the green tuft, someone had wrapped a chain around the tree and girdled it. So did the same sort of damage, but just kind of in a unique way. This is Canton. And Canton, we found it in 2020. And if you drive through Canton now, good luck finding an ash tree. Most of them were infested. Some were being treated, and they're looking good. Treatments are very effective, done properly. But a lot of trees just ended up dying, and the city said you got to get them all down and out to the dump, and they did that. They managed to do it. But think of that. That's why I'm so pleased with communities that are being very proactive about this, going out there, removing their unwanted ash. I do like to see ash being treated, by the way. I don't want to see it eliminated from the landscape. But getting out there, a good example is Dakota Dunes. This last week, we did the last marking of untreated ash. We've been doing that for 4 years. They had a plan in place, planned removal, pockets here and there, so the whole city, and followed up very quickly by replanting. So you can look at areas that we removed trees 4 years ago, and they've got trees in now for 4 years, so they're making a good headway. Um, Canton, they got to get some plantings done here because we're seeing streets that went to this going to this now. And what Canton did do is get all the trees chipped, and they got them to the right dimensions, but it was a lot of work done over a very short time period. As a reminder, egg stage is June, July. Eggs are laid underneath bark flakes on the tree, particularly the upper part of it. The larvae hatch in June and then spend all the way until November feeding just beneath the bark. They overwinter as prepupae or a J larvae, we call them. They form a little circle, as you can see here, a little twist just beneath the bark there in a little cell. And then in May, so we're probably about 2 weeks away from starting to see pupae develop. We're seeing the larvae just beginning to shrink a little bit to enter this stage. And then usually the end of May is when we have adults coming out of the D-shaped hole they cut. And there's the adults, and they're out in June and July. It was interesting. The population's gotten high enough in some areas of Lincoln and Minnehaha County that literally people were catching them in their hands last year in Lenox, for example. People were saying, I caught this. What is it? It's an emerald ash borer. Population was that high. Well, guess what? I'm already getting a lot of calls of emerald ash borer that aren't emerald ash borer, but because of the drought, those trees are attractive to a lot of other borers. And this is the banded ash borer, and that's the adult. Kind of darkened. You can see that. It's got that little coloration there. That one they pulled out of the wood, so it's a little bit of a mess. But that's what its galleries look like. And this is one that I looked at just this last week. Someone thought their tree had emerald ash borer. And obviously, we're going to check that out if it's in an area county to which we don't have a current infestation. And with this one, what I want you to notice is look at how deep those holes are going in. That's the clue. Dying ash tree. Yes, you see powder-filled galleries in there, which are characteristic of emerald ash borer. But the holes are going much deeper than what we typically find with emerald ash borer. Even their overwintering chambers don't go that deep. And that was the case with this one. In fact, I was scraping it down, and I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but if you look into that hole right to just a little bit right of center, can you see something peeking out of it? That was the banded ash borer, which looks different from the emerald ash borer. The banded ash borer, as with all the Cerambyces, roundhorn, notice it's got a thickened head. All right, it's kind of swollen up there with a very small head capsule, and it's got rounded segments. Where the emerald ash borer is flattened and straight, not rounded. And you get a better picture here. That's what the emerald ash borer looks like. It's got the two little pinchers on its butt. It's got these bell-shaped segments and then kind of a bubbly head. But that looks different from the banded ash borer that you're looking at on the left-hand side of your screen. So the larvae are very easy to separate. And if you look at emerald ash borer, notice in this picture, you don't see those big holes going deep, do you? You see the entire gallery that is all powder filled, very similar to the banded ash borer, but it's staying right at that interface with the exception of a little chamber cut in where the larvae are going to overwinter. Now, woodpeckers will go after both. And so that's why I've been getting the calls. There's a lot of stressed ash out there, and they're very vulnerable now to our native borers, redheaded being one of them, redheaded and banded, excuse me, being two. But if you're looking at a tree that has emerald ash borer in, like this one, and the person owned it said, wait a minute, there's a lot of bark off. Now, on the left-hand side, I'd scrape that with a hatchet. But if you look at the right side, you can see that blonding where that outer layer bark has been removed. That's what you're looking for. If it's just little pecks like this, little spots, generally that's our banded or red-headed ash borer because the woodpeckers will go after it, but they're not as numerous. They go too deep. So you'll find some pecks and blonding here and there, not whole streaks as you will with emerald ash borer. Oh, and I love this picture. This was sent to one of the conservation districts. The person thought, well, I must have a boar in my ash tree uh, because the woodpeckers are after it. No, no, not this one. The woodpeckers here generally are after their cavity nesters, so they're making a big hole, and they're usually looking for carpenter ants. When you find big holes in these trees, and again, they'd use them for nesting too, they're cavity nesters, but they go into the soft wood where the carpenter ants have been. And now they got a meal as well as easy to make a home. So you're finding these big rounded holes. Pileated woodpeckers and a number of others will do that. They don't do this for emerald ash borer. They're not cutting one big hole into the center. They're just kind of drilling or pecking throughout the surface because you don't go that deep. But I thought that was a great picture. And injections work. Once again, if they're done properly, inject, and you look in Sioux Falls, the ash that are left in most areas are there because they have been being treated. But again, we're not recommending treating in areas to which you don't have emerald ash borer. I am willing, not willing, it's not probably a bad choice of words, but I'm certainly understanding of people that say, well, I live in the adjacent county. Can I treat? Well, sure, there's no law saying you can't, and I understand your concern. And the concern is valid because we always find it after it's been there. Okay. We always find it after it's been there. So it's not going to surprise me if, let's say, in 3 years or 4 years, we find it in Huron. And it's just a guess. It's not like I've got a prediction to it. Or we find it, in Salem within a couple of years. It should start picking up momentum. So I'm not advocating people start treating in Huron yet, but as it kind of moves, we find it now next in DeSmet, for example. Well, you're getting a little closer. And you know what? If you're treating every 3 years, because emerald ash borer has not been confirmed in that area yet, well, probably by the time you're doing your second, we've confirmed it. So we're not saying peer yet. Please don't treat out there. They've got a good plan. They're working their plan to help reduce their ash, but you don't need to treat yet. But if you're in the adjacent area, Turner County, for example, Yankton, Vermilion, excuse me, Vermilion, yes, I could certainly understand that and start treating there. So a little early is not bad. But if you are treating, you really want to wait until the leaves start coming out. And I mean just starting. And the reason for that is this insect lives just beneath the bark, just about where the water's being moved, which is in the current sapwood. And ash, oops, Ash doesn't form its new rings until right about now. And when it forms that new ring, you know what it does? It leafs out. And so if you wait till it just starts to leaf out, you know it's already set up its plumbing system for the year. So when you inject it, the chemical is going to go into this year's growth. And we want it taken up all the way through, including the leaves, because mom has to feed on the leaves for about 10 days before she lays eggs. And wouldn't it be best to kill mom before she even lays an egg? Yep. And so early treatments are the ones I prefer. Now, again, some people don't realize they have the insect in their trees and they spray in the summer. I get that. Or inject in the summer. But ideally, and most companies are doing this for their established clientele, they get out sometime into May and early June to do the treatments. All right. Well, I'm going to finish up with this stuff. I don't care what this year goes, we're going to see some leaf diseases. We are going to see apple scab. We'll see more if we have a wet spring like we did last year, even though it went dry, we saw infection. But the thing I want to bring up is we are approaching very quickly the first spray. Green tip, when that bud just begins to open, that's the first spray for apple scab on your crab apples to make sure they have all those leaves this summer. If you miss that spray, you've really missed the best window. It's not the only spray. You'll notice another one's done at pink stage, just when the flower buds are showing, a third one at petal fall, and then two more in the summer, about 10 days after petal fall. So it does require 4 or 5 applications if you're spraying the foliage as opposed to an injection. But that first spray is coming up very quickly. I do have it in the pest alert. And there's a variety of chemicals that can be used or active ingredients that can be used for the treatments of these. There's a number of commercial companies that apply this too. Homeowners can use even Captan, which will work. Chlorothalonil can only be used if it's on trees you don't intend to eat the fruit. So if you got a crab apple, you're not going to eat the fruit. It can be used on that, but it can't be used on fruiting trees. And cedar apple rust, yes, we're going to be treating for that as well, but there's less chemistry for this one. So you've got to be real careful what you spray with. This one, again, is a reminder, the foliage is infected in the summer by the cedars, the junipers, and then this disease moves back to the junipers in the fall. But when you start seeing those telea horns form in the spring on the cedars, that's when you want to spray. So we begin spraying a little bit later for this disease than we do for the apple scab. And a reminder too, the cedars can be 2 miles away and still cause infection. So the old idea of cutting down all the cedars within 100 feet, that's long since gone. 2 mile radius, you're cutting down a lot of cedars. And so it just kind of moves from one to the other. But this works good. And Captan does not work on cedar apple rust. I did want to mention that. And here's what does work. Another thing you got to do is get out there and any apple trees you got and clean up any mummified or dried fruit from the tree or from the ground, as well as rake up the fallen leaves or mow them into small pieces. If you do that, that's going to help a lot of diseases. That's one of our best sanitation measures. So we got good weather today. Sounds like statewide. Tony's making it sounding like the hills are just as nice as Brookings. Hope it's that way across the entire state. And if we do that, that'll help reduce it. But yeah, I see trees with mummified fruit on them. Clean that up, dispose of it. Don't just pull it in your compost bin. Dispose of it. So with that, as I said, I wanted to leave some time for questions. This would be a kind of a little shorter one. But for those you, before we get to the questions, and I'll turn that over to Tony here in 1 minute, for those of you that are looking for your ISA CU credits, the title that our liaison used to submit the credits was this: What to Expect This Spring, Pests and and problem forecast. Okay. So title it that, and your CU number is DS 25 013. So with that, I'll leave this up here for a minute, but Tony, I'll turn it back to you. If we have any questions, let's give it a start.
Thing. Brandon up there in Custer State Park had asked where you got the data for the soil temps, and then he actually I think found it. That's from the SDSU website, right? The climate page.
Very good. Yes. It's on the climate page. The Mesonet is what it's called. And when you go to that, you can look at soil temperatures by the day, even because they have stations throughout the state. You can look at it at 4 inches from either bare soil, which is what I use, or sod. And the reason I use bare soil is that's what you're planning for windbreaks in that. The other thing I might mention, since Brandon's on, he's going to get a call from me because I'm going to be out there next Tuesday because we're seeing another problem in the Black Hills because of the drought. And if any of you are from that area, notice how poor the pines look along the roads. What you're seeing is salt injury. So I've been collecting samples and we're going to start processing them in this next week. Hence I want to collect some at Custer State Park. So that's where Brandon's getting called. I've already been at Mount Rushmore and a couple of other areas. But why the problem? If you use road salt during the winter and you don't have a lot of snow and you don't have any rain, it dries on the road and then gets picked up as a dust and deposited on the needles. And we found through a study that if you have dry weather and you don't have a lot of rains in the spring, we see more road salt injury. And I found some places that are using just plain old rock salt, sodium chloride. And that's pretty good at damaging ponderosa pine foliage. So I'm not saying it's hills wide, but we are seeing more of it. And one reason is the use of that salt, but more importantly, just because of the drier conditions. So we are, and that'll be a good chat this summer when we talk about things. All right. What else?
Next question, a similar topic, I guess. Do the guidelines for soil temperatures that you discussed for planting bare root seedlings, do those apply to planting bare root nursery stock, about 1 inch caliper trees?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the problems we found is if you put that in the ground too early, especially a 1 inch stock, it may not have leaves, but it's got buds. And those buds need some moisture and they're going to dry out. I know everybody wants to rush out there and get the stock in, but waiting is going to improve survival. We do need to have the roots grow, so I should be able to find white tips. Not that I'm asking you to dig up those trees after they're in the ground, before it breaks bud. And 45s are minimum. 50 is really the normal for everything kicking off. So it doesn't matter if it's bare root, 1 inch caliper, 2 inch caliper, or bare root seedling. Please follow those. Now, if you say, well, I've got a container. Well, a container plant already has a root system in it, and the containers usually are warming up faster because they're above ground right now, and they've just been brought in. You can put those in the ground now because they've already got an established root system in a pot, and you're pulling it out of the pot and putting it in the soil. But they won't grow as quickly until the soil's warm so they can move out. But the real critical one are the bare roots.
Eric up in Jamestown was curious, does the Zimmerman pine moth affect our non-native mugo pines?
Yes, thank you for that one. I didn't mention it because I see it mostly on our big three, Scots pines, Austrian pines, and ponderosa. And I will say for the mugo pines, it's really what we call the Swiss mountain pines. They're all Pinus mugo, but we have two forms of mugo pines, the low growing, the 3 foot, 4 foot, or so rounded shrub. And then we have the more upright forms. I mean, we've got some that are 30 feet tall. Those are the ones affected because we need a branch diameter kind of about the diameter of my coffee cup here. And we have that with some of the larger mugos, but thank you for that. I can find, and by the way, I can find pine wilt disease in large mugo pines. So they're not exempt if they get about 10 feet tall or taller from both those problems. Good question.
And Nathan's asking if that the warm spell followed by the cold weather we had recently, is that going to affect any trees that have been budding or leafing out?
It could. I'm hoping not. It didn't get that cold again. We did have a little bit of that cold snap earlier on, but when I've started pulling bark away, I'm not seeing browning on some of our more sensitive plants. So we may have dodged the bullet. Having said that, if the temperatures drop near zero in the next week or two, no, at that point we will have damage because most of our plants have deacclimated to the point that even zero would cause damage to plants right now. But at least in the bark testing we've done, I've not seen extensive injury. What I have seen is desiccation injury.
Do it for our questions here. I know Rex made a comment just noticing what appears to be salt injury around Spearfish Canyon. I know all the different agencies are watching the canyon now, and there's different issues going on with those pine trees. But sounds like Derek and he are going to have a conversation about that. I don't know if you want to touch at all, Dr. Ball, on what we might expect in the canyon this spring or summer.
Sure, I can do that briefly. First of all, you know what? If Rex, if you got some areas to look at, I'll I'll be up in there by Tuesday afternoon, and I could grab some samples as well from roadsides. But for the rest of our listeners here, and we did have a little workshop on this in Spearfish, we are seeing bubbling up of mountain pine beetle in that area. Tony's been out and looked at some properties and found mountain pine beetle. I've seen it up there. Forest Service has seen it. It is not a hills-wide epidemic. We don't need to fear that. Let's call it a regional outbreak that in pockets in the northern hills, between, look at Savory as being kind of the epicenter, but from Spearfish all the way down to Lead area, we are seeing it. Now, having said that, when Kurt Allen, the Forest Service entomologist, and myself looked around Spearfish itself, Iron Mountain areas and that, what we found was a lot of turpentine injury, a turpentine beetle injury. But yes, and in fact, I've found mountain pine beetle in Custer State Park even. It never disappears, but the populations are low, but they are building in the northern hills. Not that we're going to see an epidemic, but it is something, as Tony mentioned, that we and the Forest Service are closely monitoring to see how the population will extend this year. And we do our our sampling in June to look at where the population is going that fall. So we will bring it up later on this summer. Thank you, Tony.
Well, perfect. That looks like all of the questions in the chat box for now. Puts us about 5 minutes before the hour. One last reminder, if you are an SAF certified forester and you want any CEUs for today's workshop, please add those credentials into the chat box. Still on the screen is your ISA code for those ISA arborists who are going to self-report. And I just had one more question pop in real quick. I think it'll be a quick answer, Dr. Ball. Any
Sure.
noticeable IPS infestations to be concerned about in the hills? It may be a little early, but
Not quite yet. We need consistent 60-degree temperatures to get them flying again, and we're going to reach that real quickly here. Companies are out spraying trees for that, and yes, right now we're seeing enough IPS throughout the hills, particularly Rapid City up, but I'm seeing it down in Custer too. Is that a reminder? Do not be chipping trees right now. Do not be piling slash right now. That's going to be very attractive to the beetle. And if you've got high value trees next to your property or next to your home or that, we are suggesting that you consider having those sprayed by commercial service relatively soon, in order to stop the population. And by the way, those in the northern hills, we and the Forest Service are recommending high value trees around your home be sprayed not only for ips, but for mountain pine beetle. Again, the high value trees, the big pines near your home. So yes, we are seeing ips as well. If the drought continues, we'll see more of it.
And that ought to do it, folks, for our April Forest Health Workshop. Please join us next month. Next month, I believe we're talking emerald ash borer, possibly some pine wilt disease uh, updates for us. So look for that flyer in the coming weeks. Thank you so much for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Thank you for joining us, everybody.